Hello there, it's John here, and welcome to this week's book group. I hope you're really well, and well, it's raining terribly here and very cold, so I hope wherever you are, you're warm and happy and have a cup of tea. So I decided to do today's book blog from home, just because it's rainy and cold, and I've got the fire on, and I can just have endless cups of tea and yeah, be in the kind of the quiet of the house. So for today's pieces, I chose pieces that really look at kind of the aftermath of division, and kind of two different ways, I suppose, of reflecting on that, on kind of what happens when we're forced to be somewhere that we don't want to be, or we have to leave where the place that we've always thought is our home. And we start with a kind of legendary story, really. Legendary in that it's kind of known so very well in the place that it comes from, but less well known here, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. But the piece is Toba Tek Singh by Siddique Hassan Manto, and you may or may not have heard of Manto. Manto is possibly considered one of the greatest Indian writers of the 20th century, and this short story is perhaps considered one of the greatest short stories of all time. So it kind of I didn't tell the group this before we got started, because you build something up like that, as I shouldn't have done here actually. You build something up like that, and there's a tendency to kind of want to kind of find fault, but I've been reading this story for many years, and I've yet to find fault with it. It truly is a very special story. It's written when Manto lived in India pre-partition. So that's when India was just one country. There was no India, no Pakistan, no Bangladesh. There was just India, and the British had come in sort of a few hundred years before, and as part of their exit strategy, inverted commas, it was decided to kind of give in to small-minded politics and divide the country. And of course, this terrible thing occurs, and disruption and murder and rape and violence, and 2 million people die. For myself, I lost a great deal of family in that. My grandmother, my 3 aunties on my father's side, and my mum too is from a divided country. She's from Northern Ireland. So it was interesting having sort of 2 parents that are kind of have these kind of splits in them. But Manto writes about a group of lunatics, quite literal lunatics, in an asylum, and the asylum is in India, and of course it's a closed world. This is his kind of technique for this story. The asylum is a closed world, and so it's kind of cut off from the world. It has no say in the world, and the inmates of the asylum can't figure out how where you are can be in one country one day, and then just a few months later you were in a different country, and yet you've not gone anywhere. And it's been decided by the 2 new governments that there'll be an exchange of inmates. So Muslim inmates in India will be transferred to asylums in Pakistan, and Hindu and Sikh inmates will be in Pakistan will be transferred to asylums in India. And it kind of unfolds from there. It's a really interesting story in that it kind of slips and changes, and what is said kind of 1 minute is kind of shown to be something else the next minute. Yet throughout this, Manto manages to hold the whole thing together. And the way he does it is by never taking his heart out of the humanity of things. There is absolute firm belief in humanity, even though this madness is going on. Is there? I've actually spoken about this story and Manto recently on Radio 3. So they asked me to do an essay to open the Partition series this year on Radio 3 in August. So I'll put a link for that down below, because I believe it's still on iPlayer. And if you're interested in kind of what films you could watch, what books you could have a look at, short stories and so on, kind of the cultural response to the partition, then there's plenty of stuff in that essay that I don't have time for in this short blog. So let me read you a little bit of Toba Tek Singh. Toba Tek Singh is a place that, it's a fictional town that the main protagonist decides he came from, and then later on he becomes Toba Tek Singh himself. The name of the place becomes the name of the man, and he finds himself in this place where he's trying to be kind of pushed across into a place that he just doesn't know at all, a country that didn't even exist before, and he tries to remain in no man's land, not knowing what to do. Let me read you a little. On an extremely cold day, lorries filled with Hindu and Sikh lunatics left the asylum in Lahore, accompanied by the police and some higher officials. At Wagah, the superintendents from both sides met, and after the initial formalities were out of the way, the actual transfer began, continuing all night. Getting the lunatics out of the lorries and handing them over to the Indian officials proved to be an arduous task. Many of them refused to leave the lorries, and those who did ran about wildly, making it difficult for the guards and other officials to keep them under control. Those who were naked tore off any clothing that was forced on them. Many swore and cursed, one or two sang, some fought with each other, and others cried or wailed. Confusion was rampant. The women were also a problem, and the cold weather made everyone's teeth chatter. Most of the lunatics were not in favour of the transfer, because they could not comprehend the reasons for being uprooted from one place and thrown into another. One or two people, not completely mad, shouted, "Pakistan Zindabad!" and "Pakistan Murdabad!" This infuriated both the Muslims and Sikhs, and altercations between them were avoided with great difficulty. When Bishan Singh's turn came to cross the border, he asked the official who was entering his name in a register, "Where is Toba Tek Singh? In Pakistan or in India?" The official laughed and said, "In Pakistan." On hearing this, Bishan Singh leapt back and ran towards the remaining group of men who awaited their return. The Pakistani soldiers caught him and tried to force him back to the checkpoint. He resisted vigorously. "Toba Tek Singh is here," he yelled. So there you go. I'm so proud of the reading group in that they didn't just love this piece kind of thing. They were just so surprised by it. It is such an important piece of writing, but it's not just important in that it's worthy. It's just so well done, the way that things shift and change and move within it, and yet the ground is always held by sheer humanity and kind of clarity of humanity. And I mean, the group's response was basically, why is this story not in every kind of, high school? Why is it not on the curriculum? It's kind of history and it's literature at the same time. They just thought it's kind of an absolute must read. It should be part of our kind of canon of reading, really, in this country, given that Britain has a large part to play in where this story came from as well. And there was such a rush to kind of want to buy the book. And what's interesting, of course, is we're sitting in a bookshop, and it's a very beautiful bookshop, but of course this book is just not there. A book of this importance is not in this very large bookshop. So the book is Mottled, and I promised I'll post a link down below, and it's 50 Stories of Partition Times by Manto, and I cannot recommend this highly enough. And yes, it is one of my favourite sort of pieces, and I allow myself occasionally to kind of drop things in that I like. I do also choose things that are not to my taste, as I say this every week, because I don't run the group or organise the group in a way to just be about liking something and not liking something. And while we like this, it was much more interesting that we could perceive the depth of it, that we really kind of brought up so many questions. It just brought up so many questions that needed bringing up, and not in a kind of an accusatory way, but just to kind of reflect on loss and forced migration and the circumstances behind kind of migration and what's happening in the world today, with Manus Island and with the European situation and Brexit and things like that. It just, we don't talk politics in the group. I try to always keep that down. But human ticks, we talk, literature is going to bring you up against the human and kind of, what's right and what's real, and is any of this stuff that's going on and has gone on, is that real at all, or is it just serving power mongers? This was kind of what we were talking about. So yeah, link down below for that, and a link for the BBC Three radio essay as well. And then for our poet, we looked at Egyptian poet Iman Mersal, and she lives in Berlin, I believe now, and we looked at a poem called, excuse me a second, a poem called Things Elude Me, and I chose this because it's also about somebody who's been displaced. In this case, Mersal imagines returning to the house that she used to live in and kind of reflects on the feelings that she thinks she will feel. Let me just share a little piece of this with you.
One day, I will pass in front of the house that was mine for years and try not to measure how far it is from my friends' homes. The plump widow, whose cries for love woke me, is not my neighbour anymore. I'll invent things so as not to get confused, count my steps, or bite my lower lip, savouring the slight pain, or keep my fingers busy with tearing a whole packet of paper tissues. I will not try a shortcut to avoid the pain. I will not stop myself from loitering as I train my teeth to chew on hate that leaps from within, and to forgive the cold hands that pushed me toward it. I will remember that I did not smudge the bathroom's whiteness with my own darkness.
Something that came up talking about both pieces is how connected human beings are to the land, how connected we are to place, to our homes, And this is not in any kind of any kind of nationalistic, patriotic sort of way. It's just that the material aspect of being human, we interlink with the objects and the places that we kind of sort of come into contact with. We looked at the kind of the musicality of the poem. She has this way of kind of introducing a thing, and then there are kind of little variations and kind of refrains, almost like a kind of mantra-like kind of musicality that kind of comes after things. I will not stop myself from loitering as I train my teeth to chew on hate that leaps from within, and to forgive the cold hands that pushed me towards it. I will remember that I did not smudge the bathroom's whiteness. There's this kind of strong music in there. Interestingly, though, the group were not very well taken with this poem, and if the goal of having a reading group was to kind of find only things that we like, then it would be quite boring, actually. So, as I say, I don't try to please the group by saying you're going to love this, you're going to love this. What I look for, and this group, as we've gone on, I think this is week 7 or 8 now. As we've gone on, the kind of the settling in, it's because we kind of trust what's kind of happening now, and kind of the vibe of the group. It feels like we can kind of tackle much kind of greater texts, or in much greater, with much greater depth. It's not that texts are greater necessarily, it's that we can actually kind of get to grips with them much more and leave behind that I like this, I don't like that, but we actually meet the text and then bring a kind of more genuine response to it than the conditioned reply of I like this, I like that. But it was interesting that this was not a liked poem. We found it artificial, I suppose, whereas Manto's story is so much a construction and a device to point to a particular thing, and yet kind of holds its humanity. The fact that this is somebody who says, one day I will pass in front of my house, and then kind of imagines these feelings from that and creates pain from this kind of imagined set of feelings, and then commits it to paper and then kind of puts it out, really didn't go down well with the group. They said it felt kind of poetic in the wrong way, I suppose, because it's looking for the pain. While poetry and literature, has to talk about sometimes the kind of the strong material of life, this just felt like kind of a milking of pain that didn't even exist, I couldn't possibly go to this place because I'm going to feel these terrible things, and then and it's going to be like this. And actually, this is what people do. This is kind of one of the reasons I chose this. This is what people do. We kind of create pain ahead of time in our own heads, thinking it's going to be like this, it's going to be like that. It creates a kind of pain body in us, and then we kind of we don't meet the moment. We don't go to the place or meet the person that we need to meet with a kind of presence of the moment. We meet them with all this stuff that we've sort of imagined of how it's going to be, and so there's a kind of cut off feeling in the poem, even though it's kind of talking about painful things. There's a kind of locked in sort of feeling to it. I do think it's worth a look, and I do think her work is worth a look, and I think it's worth kind of exploring kind of the poetics of this. So yeah, I'll leave you with that. So it's kind of a lot to think about this week, and maybe not just think about, but to kind of reflect on more in the heart as well. I hope you can pick up the Manto. If out of all the books that we've kind of looked at so far, if I had to say buy this one, I would say buy the Manto. Although next week we have a writer that's kind of supremely powerful as well. So I'll probably be saying something similar again. No, but Manto hasn't had the exposure that he should have had in this country. And, you know, the one amazing thing about reading and sharing your reading with people, it's not trying to convince us to kind of like this and like that, but just that sheer joy of kind of reading something, of being exposed to something new that you've never come across ever before, to kind of ideas and to people and to lives that you wouldn't have met otherwise. And that's what reading has always meant to this little being. And I assume that if you're kind of watching this with interest, then there's an element of that in you as well. So let me wish you well. I hope you have a good rest of your day, whatever you're doing. Please subscribe to this channel. Please give us a thumbs up if you've liked this video. And, you know, if you get a chance to read any of the stories or the poems that we've been recommended in our series of blogs and groups, then please leave us a comment down below, because I'd love to have your kind of sort of feedback too. And from next year, because I work in tandem with the Royal Literary Fund, Bradford Literature Festival, and with Waterstones on this, with kind of Royal Literary Fund kind of leading the way, but real kind of incredible support from Waterstones and the Lit Fest. They're looking to do a kind of online book group, so we'll just base it around this really. So that'll be starting when we come back after the kind of the winter break, and so, you know, do join us for that. It'd be really good for us to sort of be able to interact a bit more as well. So things might change just very slightly, like the video might go up a day later, and there might be a kind of forum where you can put your comments and things like that. But that'd be great just to extend it out. I know some of you are kind of watching in other places of the world already. Hi, Linda. Yeah, lots of love to you. Have a great rest of your day, and take care of yourself.